them all sincerely for coming to this IPSC event. So to chair the meeting we have Dr. Harry Browne. Harry is a highly respected lecturer, author and journalist, and he's been a long supporter of the Palestinian cause and a member of the anti-war movement, Gaza Action Ireland and Academics for Palestine. So we're delighted to have Harry here to chair this discussion. We also have Brian Cuthbert, who's the Director of Campaigns and Technology of UpLift. So Brian has been a powerful voice in the discourse and has recently sent a submission to the government challenging them on their increased military contracts with Israel, increased dual-use trade with Israel and increased use of airspace by Israeli weapons transporters. Brian has spent many years campaigning on democracy and climate justice issues with a number of different grassroots organisations. We also have Ross McGann from UpLift. He's the social media coordinator of UpLift. Ross has been a strong voice and presence online at demonstrations in support of the Palestinian people. His online work is impactful and resonates with the masses. His dog, Simba, has also been a welcome presence at many a demo. And we also have our friend Eoghan McNeill here, who's a co-founder and editor of The Ditch. The Ditch is your least favourite politician's least favourite publication. So the investigative journalism carried out by The Ditch is incisive, sharp and uncompromising. Eoghan's news features and culture writing have appeared in the Irish Independent, China Daily and the Court News. And we're also delighted to welcome Roman Shortall from The Ditch. He's a co-founder and legal counsel at The Ditch. Roman is both an investigative journalist and a solicitor, and again The Ditch are setting the bar for investigative journalism in Ireland. So thank you very much and welcome the lads. Thank
you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's great. Apologies for the slightly late start this evening, and again, as always with the IPSC, you can always count on a really decent crowd turning out, even on a very cold night. You know, our second winter of genocide. The people have continued to come out and show their solidarity, love, and support for the people of Palestine. This panel, I'll say to start with, it's male and pale. It's stale over on this side, just, but male and pale the rest of the way across. And actually, quite normally, I will, when I get an invitation where it looks like it's shaping up along those lines, I'll say, "What can we do anything about the way the panel is stacked up?" But honestly, I was so happy to be asked. In this case, the IPSC has such a track record as, I would say, the leading human rights organization in Ireland, and the organization that has, brought us the voices of so many people from all around the world, speaking from all genders and none, and from all nationalities, speaking on behalf of the Palestinian people. And I think, on this occasion, if seeing the IPSC's work in its totality, we can put up with the fact that we've got a great panel that happens to be male and pale this evening. And the focus tonight is very much on Irish state complicity. So what we have is a set of activists and legal and journalistic experts to focus in on that topic. Now, I know that probably some of you will want to bring in topics that are slightly outside that, but this is not primarily a meeting about what's happening in Palestine and Lebanon at the moment. It doesn't happen without the horrendous events that are happening in Palestine and Lebanon. And it's absolutely, we're all very committed to bringing an end to the genocide that's going on there. But our focus tonight is primarily on this question of Irish complicity. And I want to try to work through an initial Q&A with the panel. I'm going to say the boys or whatever. Myself and the lads are going to have a chat. Initially, that's going to kind of focus on the legal aspect of the case. Roman is a lawyer, and all of the two groups represented here, UpLift and The Ditch, have had I would say a legal approach to what's happening. And we'll talk a little bit maybe about how law and activism work together, the story, where lawfare fits into our efforts to change the picture in terms of Irish complicity. I want to talk a little bit, I know that there's an audience interested in this, I want to talk a little bit about the media aspect of it. And, it was funny, Rebecca describing me as highly respected. I would think that at least half of this panel was also widely despised by the mainstream media in this country. And I'm sure we want to maybe talk through that relationship a little bit, why it is that a little tiny website like The Ditch is breaking most of the important stories about what's happening with Irish complicity. with the war in Palestine, and I do want to talk about the morality of what's taking place here. I think that sense of moral responsibility. I remember back in the nearly 20 years ago now, when the pit stop plowshares were on trial for their action at Shannon Airport, and we'll be talking about Shannon, I'm sure, tonight, that one of the defendants, Nguyen Dunlop, said that she acted at Shannon out of a sense of responsibility. And she saw responsibility in terms of her ability to respond. That she was in a position that people in Iraq weren't in, and we are in a position that people in Palestine and Lebanon aren't in terms of our particular ability to respond to aspects of this crisis. Now, obviously, people in Lebanon and Palestine also have their own agency and have some ability to respond as well, but I think it's important that we see our role here in that moral framework. And finally, to talk about the politics, because we're in an election season, and that's important here. So I'm going to go through those issues kind of with the panel for probably maybe half an hour or 40 minutes, and then have a kind of a similar time going around the floor until somebody says shut up, shut up, shut up, and see what you have to add, and hopefully to ask of the panelists that we have here tonight. So I want to start on that, what's going on here, which I think a lot of this audience knows already, but what are we doing about that in legal terms? Because both UpLift and the Ditch are involved in highlighting legal issues with Ireland's role in the genocide, and also in some cases directly taking cases. So maybe you start talking about that, Brian, from UpLift's standpoint, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, no worries. So thanks for having us again. First of all, UpLift is a people-powered campaigning organisation with over 350,000 members all around Ireland. So it isn't like myself and Ross taking this case. It's thousands and thousands of people like yourselves all over Ireland who are taking this case. And just to start by saying how much of a disgrace it is that ordinary people are having to take their own government to court just to make them follow their own laws, to follow EU laws, and to comply with the Genocide Convention. In terms of UpLift's campaign on this, again, our members have been looking for any way possible to affect change in Gaza in the last year. And this started off for us as a research project into Ireland's dual-use trade and our military trade with Israel. What we found through that research was actually quite shocking. Ireland's military trade with Israel has doubled in the last year. So we spent millions of euro purchasing drones from Israel in 2016 from companies like Elbit Systems and Aeronautics Defence Industries. And we've been paying them every single year since then for support and technical expertise for those drones. Now, you have to ask yourself, why are we paying Israeli drones manufacturers for technical expertise with drones? Why are they such experts? And we all know the answer to that is, sadly, Israeli weapons companies market their drones as being battle tested, which means that they use them on men, women and children in Gaza. So when Micheál Martin pays Israeli drones companies for their drones expertise, he's rewarding them for battle testing those weapons. He's rewarding that behaviour financially. We called on them to end those contracts. We saw they had active contracts of over €250,000 in 2023. We called on them to end those contracts. We were shocked to find that in Q1 of 2024 already that contract has been doubled in size to nearly €600,000. And that's just Q1. The figures for Q2 and Q3 aren't out yet. In terms of dual-use trade, what we uncovered was that Ireland's dual-use trade, so dual-use is goods that have military and civilian capabilities. Our dual-use trade with Israel increased 700% last year in 2023, so 7 times higher than it was the previous year. A lot of that spike was in the last quarter, so from October to December, and we can see already in Q1 of 2024 that high rate of dual-use trade has continued. The issue with the dual-use trade as well is that during that period, the Israeli tech sector, the civilian tech sector, has plummeted. So you have to ask yourself, if the government would like to say that this dual-use trade is only civilian, it's not the military side of dual-use, it's only civilian side. But the Israeli civilian tech sector has plummeted in the last year, and our dual-use trade with them has soared at the same time that their war machine is coming to full swing. So you have to ask yourself why that is.
Alright, so yeah, as I said, we noticed a lot of these discrepancies in the
in military trade and dual use trade rising over the last year, and we also uncovered this discrepancies in our trade, and then we also noticed a number of laws that the Irish government are potentially violating. Just one in particular that I mentioned is EU Council Common Position 2008944 CFSP, which has 8 specific criteria for trading in military equipment and military technology. You can't send goods to countries that don't have respect for human rights or international law. You can't sell goods if there's a risk that those goods will be used for undesirable purposes. You can't send goods if there's a risk that the country of final destination will use them for internal repression, if there's a risk that they'll be used to inflame an existing ongoing armed conflict. Loads of these different laws that Israel clearly does not meet the criteria for. What's interesting is that Simon Coveney, who was the Minister for Trade in February, said in the Dáil that not only does he believe that Israel meets all these criteria, but they haven't rejected a single licence in 2023 or 2024 so far. And the Minister for State, Derek Leary, reconfirmed that position in May of this year. Again, to say that there's no reason to cancel these, there's no risk of any of these things being violated, we think is a blatant breach of this particular law. And then when we started looking into this and we brought in a legal team, so Dara Mackin of Phoenix Law is representing us. Dara Mackin, some of you might know from the Stardust case. He also took the case of the hooded men for people being transported to Guantanamo Bay through Shannon Airport. We also uncovered a number of other laws and violations, including potential breaches and complicity under the Genocide Convention for facilitating or assisting in genocide, as stated by the ICJ in the Serbia versus Bosnia case. I'll pass on to somebody else now. But
Yeah,
it's a brief.
Yeah, but maybe Roman, you're good to come in here on this.
So we started, I think, in August, just initially looking into flights that were coming back from Israel to the United States that had been transporting munitions over to Israel from kind of military air bases in the States. And initially our stories focused on that those planes were using Irish airspace on their return from Israel, which meant that they were being assisted by Air Nav Ireland, that they were being assisted by Air Nav Ireland on their return from Israel. Obviously, things kind of developed into much more, just became much more serious when we discovered that kind of like there was a bit of luck involved in it. We basically discovered that an NGO in Belgium had gotten various different records from the Belgian government and discovered that munitions that had gone through Liège airport in Belgium had gone through Irish airspace since Israel's assault on Gaza since October 2023. Yeah, so initially it was just one airline. It was about, I think, maybe 5 or 6 flights. But a lot of these flights were sending over serious equipment, military equipment, weapons, munitions from the United States over to Israel, and they were illegally using Irish airspace. Some of the stuff included detonators, ammunition primer, the sort of stuff that essentially the IDF needs and can't conduct its genocide in Gaza without. We then discovered that there were a lot more airlines doing this. I think we had Israel's national airline. Eventually then we started reporting on FedEx doing a huge amount of flights, and they were also assisted and continue to be assisted by an Irish airline based out in Swords called ASL, who are heavily involved, and I would say a key airline involved in the transport of munitions from the United States over to Israel. They of course have been doing the Germany to Israel leg, and I think there's been a lot of protests outside ASL's offices. But I think, I mean, the kind of important point in all of this is that there is already legislation in place that governs the transport of munitions of war. It's been around since the 1940s, and we've given the government the evidence that we have, or a lot of the evidence that we have, and in many cases, more recently, we've told them in advance which flights are due to come over Ireland that are carrying international traffic and arms regulation goods, which is, in this particular case, it's parts for F-35 combat jets, which are used to drop 900 kilogram bombs in Gaza. So without these parts, these F-35s, they don't work. They need a constant supply of components. These components are illegally going through Irish airspace. The state knows that that's happening. They're doing nothing about it. So you have this bizarre contrast where people are going down to Shannon to protest against what's happening and are being arrested for, alleged minor public order offences. On the other hand, you have us telling the state, and we've also provided evidence to the Garda National Economic Crime Bureau, they've never responded to us. These are serious indictable offences. Each flight that goes over Ireland without permission to carry munitions, which the state says they don't have, is committing a strict liability, indictable criminal offence, which carries a prison sentence of up to 3 years. So these cases would be very straightforward to prosecute.
Right.
But the state has chosen to ignore all of that, and instead it's focusing its resources on the people protesting what's going on down in Shannon.
So it sounds like the legal thing has this dimension of like putting public pressure on the state in the presumably forlorn hope that that the guards first of all would investigate, and then the DPP would prosecute people with potential legal liability for this. But then also you guys have moved into a kind of a legal stance, having brought a solicitor into the picture. What would be the nature of legal action that UpLift or any Irish citizen could take against the state? Maybe Ross, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of our legal case, what we have done is put the Irish government on notice to end all the dual use trade that we're seeing from Ireland to Israel, to end those military contracts, as we've stated before, rip up the drone contracts, to no longer send any more money. We know that the likes of Micheál Martin, they give a little and they come out and they say things like, oh, we won't be purchasing any more drones. But what they don't tell you is there is active military contracts and they need to end. So the pressure we're trying to put on is to get that to essentially stop and to show the government the laws such as Article 1 of the Genocide Convention. We are highlighting the fact that it clearly states that you cannot assist with genocide, essentially. Prevent and punish, my apologies. Article 1 of the Genocide Convention does say that you must prevent and punish genocide when you see it. The fact that Ireland has said that we are going to be joining in with the South African ICJ case means that our government does think there's a genocide. On that note, I bumped into Mr. Micheál Martin recently.
That was coincidence.
Very coincidentally, in my local town, I was just driving past and happened to see the man. Stopped, got out, and of course I confronted him. I gave him the figure of €590,000, which is what was paid in Q1 of 2024, and he point blank denied it. Absolutely flat out rejected it. And we asked him if he could confirm what he thought that was happening in Gaza was a genocide, and he refused to answer and walked away. So it just kind of highlights they're saying one thing, they're saying they're going to take part in the ICJ case, however they're not actually taking the action, be that morally, be that legally, and they don't seem to actually have the want to put these sanctions into place, and that is what our case is kind of about, hopefully trying to push them into it.
Yeah, and I suppose just to add to that, the next step for us is that we will be looking to issue judicial proceedings at the High Court to compel them to take this action. In addition, I think kind of what you're hinting at as well is that like strategic litigation as a campaign tactic as well is a very effective way of putting pressure on them. I mean, particularly within an election cycle, you don't want to be getting taken to court by your own citizens for, like Ross said, for failing to comply with your obligations on the Genocide Convention, or for failing to comply with your own laws and with the EU laws as well. So it is the aim to try and compel them to take this action. And again, our case as well is against the role of the Taoiseach and the position of the relevant ministers. So even if that were to change over the next couple of months, the case would still proceed.
Right.
It's not like
So it's going into the High Court and seeking the High Court to make an order that compels the government to act in accordance with this. Okay, interesting. Now, Owen, you're a journalist, and the ditch though has been approaching this as a story, but also as almost like a prosecution. And where do those priorities work and fit, and how do you see them playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose myself and Roman would chat. You know, like we've been going for it'll be coming up on 4 years in kind of March or April kind of time, and like we have talked about how we used to think that we kind of straddled the line of campaigning journalism, whereas now we're just kind of like, oh, forget about it, we're just campaigning.
Line my arms.
Yeah. And, you know, I mean, it's over the last 4 years, whatever, yeah, and like we've been called a political organisation, which like our kind of position on that is, yeah, we are, so are all the other media outlets, you know. You know, what we've been doing, and yeah, like we'd be open about the fact that we are a small team and we don't necessarily have, you know, like formal publishing schedules of stuff, but we do have, you know, informal plans of stuff, and we sit down at the start of each week and we talk about what we're looking to do. And certainly part of that is whatever phrase you want to use, kind of, you know, how do you move the needle a bit, you know, how do you move things forward, how do you identify pressure points, I suppose, and exploit them, for want of a better term. The thing is, you know, the media outlets who don't do that, when it comes to what is going on in Gaza at the moment, that's a form of campaigning in itself, though, we would say, you know. So we just kind of come at it from the other angle. And yeah, I mean, like, the benefit of being a small team is that, yeah, like, we don't have that many resources, all the rest, but we've been able to, I suppose it's coming up towards 4 months now, where we've kind of been able to go almost single issue on flights, on some other stories around the Occupied Territories Bill, a story around the central bank's facilitation of the sale of Israeli war bonds. And I suppose just, yeah, like as you were saying in your introduction, there's that that kind of moral angle of it, where you kind of go, all right, well, what can we do, you know? And this is just, I suppose, our kind of contribution to the effort. You know?
I think that maybe leads into maybe a discussion a little bit about the media side of things, and maybe I'll start with the people who are from, you know, a little further outside. In other words, you're using social media very effectively, as of course the ditch is as well, but presumably UpLift would really like it if the Irish Times decided to put your case on the front page.
But absolutely,
So we won't say anything rude about them. They might even be watching on the live stream. You never know, right? So,
front page.
But maybe we can talk about that for a bit. About the way you can use the media that are available to you, but also the obstacles, and maybe even in compared to other campaigns that UpLift runs. Are there special obstacles, do you think, that arise in relation to work in this area?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it comes to any campaign with UpLift, obviously we would love to be front page, whether that's empty homes, whether it's stopping evictions from direct provision, whether it's our Gaza legal case. Obviously, we're in a kind of an area that you have to fight for that time. Either it's, you know, whether it's to get into a newspaper, whether it is, whether it's even online, whether it's on the RT News, anything like that. But it can just be, I don't know how much we can even say, because obviously we don't know the other side of it, but like I'm sure the guys in the IPSC will say as well, we have sent out press notifications as much as we can. We do our very best to notify them when something is happening, and I suppose it's a mixture of probably just fighting for the story, fighting to get that little space in the newspaper, while also we don't quite know what's on in the background. I don't know if Browne would like to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is, in fairness, we've been quite successful in getting some coverage on our initial arms report when that came out. The Irish Examiner covered that, the Irish Times covered that, I know the Currency covered it, and a couple of other publications. When we launched the legal case a couple of weeks ago, we got a lot of coverage from Extra.ie, the Journal ran a story. We had a lot of publications actually ran the story, and a couple of UK publications as well, which was interesting. Probably more because Dara is obviously a solicitor who operates in the UK as well. But and we were on drive time. What was very interesting with the drive time section is that as soon as we went off air, the government rang in to refute what we had just said, and we weren't given any chance to respond, which was the end of the show, which is fair enough. But the fact that they felt the need to do that means that they are worried about this case, and they are worried about the information that the Ditch are uncovering and that we're using in our case as well. And I would say that what they kind of came back with, I don't believe to be true in any way, and we'd hope to make that clear in a court of law. But through government's own statements, like we've seen Simon Harris, McNeill Martin both said already this year in I think April and June, there is no military transfers happening through Irish airspace or Irish airports. They point blank said that on record in the Dáil, which the lads have proven through the flight manifests and stuff from Belgium and everywhere else. That's just simply not true. So the fact that they are being put into these awkward positions and having to kind of try and shout louder than us does show that they're worried. I think it's a good thing to have your government worried about something like this. I think it's a good place to have them.
So on the media, Ronan, and and maybe this case, but over the period that the Ditch has been doing the stories that it's doing about Palestine, but also in other areas as well, you've kind of had a pretty good crash course in what other media cover, how other media regard the kind of work that you do. How do you see it, and do you think there are special obstacles and differences in relation to the Middle East that are problematic in other outlets?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were a mainstream outlet, I think you'd probably hear us on the radio. I think you'd probably see us on the TV discussing our stories. I mean, like over the years, we've often like joked among ourselves or with friends or family about the fact that you'd often see a situation where a mainstream journalist is on like a Saturday morning RTE show talking about your story. And a lot of people I don't know a lot of people, but I'm sure some people wonder like, why is that? It's not because we're refusing to go on. We don't get invited. Like, it's as simple as that. Since we started reporting on the issue of munitions being brought over Ireland, I'm open to correction from Eoghan, but I don't think we've ever gotten an invite onto.
There were 2 cancellations.
Oh yeah, well I think Eoghan got an invite. Yeah, they cancelled on him. I offered.
Lovely Donegal accent.
I offered, and then of course you see the same evening the usual right-wing hacks on these shows, like instead of ourselves. That's fine. At the start when there were some government ministers coming on and either disputing what we had reported or actually even coming out with Minister James Lawless, who's a barrister, coming out with stuff that's not legally correct.
Yeah.
And he would know that, but deliberately doing it to try and kind of twist things or direct attention away. I offered to come on RTE Drive Time to explain exactly why he was wrong and to to be given an opportunity to explain what was happening with the flights and what part of it was illegal and whatever. I've never gotten a response. Like we've offered to go on and to discuss these stories on particular radio stations or whatever, we don't get invited.
Yeah.
People don't want us on. I don't know why, but it is what it is, you know.
Do you not know why? Maybe other people
I have some suspicion.
Yeah. I mean, as Brian just said there, we have the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach on the record making declarations that have been, proven false in relation to the munitions. You'd think that might be an issue when the most senior politicians have been basically nailed in a lie. And maybe we can talk about that. I mean, I don't know to what extent UpLift needs to be careful about talking directly about electoral politics, but we are talking in the context of an election campaign. Maybe we can talk about the Palestine issue in the election, the specific kinds of issues that that the Ditch and UpLift have raised in terms of Irish complicity in the genocide, and where that does and doesn't fit in the kind of discourse around an election season. Maybe I'll start with you, Ross, and we'll come across and let everybody on.
Yeah, I suppose just in terms of what you were saying about issues relating to Palestine as a kind of in line with the election, I think everyone in this room is probably asking for the OTB to be passed, and we've all signed that petition, and we've all seen the lead up previous to the Dáil being dissolved, how there was time allocated for it. It wasn't brought forward. Yeah. Those are the kind of issues that we're hearing about. They were the kind of issues that we're seeing existing within the campaign space. It's very frustrating for people who have put so much time, put so much effort, and are really trying to make that difference. So I'm feeling like, from what I'm hearing through the spaces, whether it's online, is that those issues are definitely going to have some kind of a knock-on effect. We have the little the guide. Yeah, so we have an election guide currently just gone out there. So it is questions that you can put forward to anyone who's knocking on your door, regardless of what party they are. We kind of have most of them covered, and that's the kind of thing that we'd like to see pushed forward during this election. And we'd like to see, we do prefer to see when the politicians are actually taking a stance. And I suppose in part, on a personal note, seeing politicians come out and say that they're going to do something, knowing that they could have done something, I feel is going to have a big effect as well on whether or not people would be voting that way.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point. I think obviously we've only 8 days left, and to a certain extent, it's a question for the doorstep as much as it is one for the media or whatever. So it's interesting to hear that. That's the feeling you're getting, and it certainly looks like the government thought it needed to go into an election with a certain amount of ass covering in relation to Palestine, in spite of its record over the whole term.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, so just to plug that one more time, if you go to uplift.ie and you click on our shop site, you can get a free Gaza election guide, and it'll have questions to ask Fianna Fáil candidates, Fine Gael candidates, Sinn Féin candidates, whoever knocks on your door. There's a little section for each one. They're free on the website to download, so I would advise people get those. But yeah, like we have seen, the Irish government definitely wants to appear like they're strong on Gaza, because they know how popular it is among Irish people. In fairness to IPSC and other campaign groups like this, there have been protests all over the country in every town and village for over a year, and this is a huge issue. And we've seen a lot of nice words, but we've seen actually no action, which is what Francesca Albanese said. In terms of action, it's zero. Like we said earlier, under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, we're obligated to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. The Irish government have said a lot of nice words. They've recognised the state of Palestine. That doesn't punish the crime of genocide. They have called for ceasefire. That doesn't punish the crime of genocide. They've increased funding to UNRWA. That's a welcome gesture. It doesn't punish Israel's genocide. They haven't done anything at all that will actually punish the crime of genocide. And as well, interestingly, Eoghan Martin has been telling us for months and months that Ireland is going to intervene in Israel, in South Africa's ICJ case, accusing Israel of genocide, while at the same time increasing our military trade with Israel. And you can't have it both ways. You can't say we suspect this government may be committing genocide and we're going to go to court over it, while at the same time we're going to increase our military trade with them. And the other thing with that is, he's been promising this for months. Why hasn't he done it already? 9 countries have already intervened. Spain, Mexico, Turkey, the Maldives, like loads of countries have already done this. Again, we've seen no actual definitive action. We've just heard a lot of promises and a lot of weak words really when it comes down to what's at stake.
Ron?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, I hope that when people are voting that they will take into consideration what they believe to be either the government's actions or inactions on Gaza. I think, like, my own opinion is that the electorate has been subjected to a lot of gaslighting on anything really related to Gaza. I think it's worked to a certain degree on an international level. I think Ireland gets a lot of praise internationally that it doesn't deserve, to be honest. I don't think it's worked as well domestically. I'm sometimes surprised at people that I would talk to, you know, that would have different politics to myself, who possibly in any other country in Europe would be pro-Israel, but, you know, they're very angry, like even people on the right are very angry with the government's gaslighting on Gaza. And I think maybe they might get a surprise during the election. I don't know, but like I do think that there's only so much of it that you can get away with. You know, there's only so much gaslighting you can get away with. It doesn't work on everyone. And if you're telling people that, you know, we're going to do everything we can in Gaza, we're going to pass the Occupied Territories Bill, I think any reasonable person, you don't have to have a legal background or anything like that, any reasonable voter will look at when the Occupied Territories Bill was introduced, who co-introduced it, you know, and who's in government and what they're saying now. And what you know, what they're saying now is we're committing to a review of it. I don't believe that the government wants to pass the Occupied Territories Bill. You know, and I think that's a fair assessment of the state of play. They've had years to do it. We know legislation can be brought in overnight if it's for banks or, you know, for people that matter, you know, big business or whatever. But it can't be done for this. They were offered time to make various different amendments to it. They refused it. So, and of course we know about, we reported on Pascal Donohue's secret phone call, the pressure that they were put under by the American ambassador as well. So I don't think they do want to pass it, but I think they had to make a bit of a show before calling the election, because as the lad said, it is an issue.
Yeah. Can I before I ask you on, can I add a supplement to the general question about the election, because I think Roman has just brought up a really interesting point, is that the relationship that we're talking about here, Ireland's relationship with Israel, is really in many respects Ireland's relationship with the United States. And in particular when we're talking about these munitions, we're largely talking about munitions that are on their way from the United States to the Middle East. Ireland's relationship with the United States as an election issue is in a different kind of political space than one that's more straightforwardly about breaking trade with Israel or not supporting the genocide. And I know you're such a good thinker about the transatlantic relationship. I want to particularly point that at you.
Yeah, I mean, with all of this, I mean, if there are, like, you know, I would always say that, you know, that there are obvious moral and ethical reasons why we should extend our solidarity to Palestine. There's also a very kind of a simple one of recognition of, not that we are experiencing anything on the same level, but it's occurring because of the same reason and because of the same international structures, where, even just to take one example, if we go back to the last Irish budget, which was written about as if it were this like giveaway budget, right? And the government got their checkbook out, but no one was really particularly happy with it, in that all of the measures were sort of like one-off payments, right? That didn't fundamentally alter the nature of our relationship with the state. Now I would say that the reason government did that rather than look to actually make some actual changes or fundamental changes, is this worry, this fear about our tax haven economy, which is completely reliant on multinationals, big and small, and the corporate tax receipts that the state can bring in. Even just, I think it was today or yesterday, this guy Lutnick, the new Secretary of Commerce in the US, who has said effectively that we're going to have to look at all of these profits being booked in Ireland, right? Now, I could be wrong on this. I actually think that the US won't really do anything much material about Ireland being a tax haven, because ultimately US capital wants us to be a tax haven, and that's the most important thing, really. But I do think that this relationship will be held over us when it comes to things like the Occupied Territories Bill, and when it comes to things like illegal flights. It's just, oftentimes you'll get called a tanky for a whole lot of reasons. I'm happy enough to be called a tanky because I subscribe to Vladimir Lenin's theory on imperialism, And it's that thing of, financial imperialism enabled and maintained by militaries and shown in ways, the US, as we reported, exerting their influence on Ireland on things like the Occupied Territories Bill, And unfortunately for us, we have government parties who, I did a podcast with a guy called Anla O'Carolan, a guy from Belfast, and he kind of agreed with me on this, is that fundamentally as well, I think that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, apart from anything, I think they misunderstand the small level of agency and power that they actually have in this relationship, right? So if you look at any tax haven across the world, by and large, it's either a colony or a former colony. Even allowing for that, there is a certain amount of leverage that these tax havens can exert, because as I said, capital wants us to be a tax haven, and they don't want to be upending all of their operations from Ireland. I do think that if we had some, to put it bluntly, if our ruling parties had some level of balls, basically, that I think some level of action could be allowed, by the US, but there isn't any real will for that. And to put it bluntly, again, it's Sleevinism or Shawneeism and Neil Martin and Simon Harris, kind of perfect emblems of that.
Absolutely embody it. Yeah, I think that's interesting, and maybe something to think about in terms of whether the transition from Biden's genocide to Trump's genocide might change the political picture somewhat in Europe, maybe more broadly, as well as here. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that prospect. Or maybe we'll take it to the floor, actually, and see what people say. Before I do get the microphone out, it's just 8 o'clock, good time to go to the floor, but a couple of announcements that the IPSC have asked me to make about upcoming events. And the first one relates very much to what we've been talking about in terms of politics. There is an election hustings, meaning that there'll be reps from the main parties and 3 organizations together with an opportunity to present questions and quiz those representatives. It's the IPSC along with CATU and Friends of the Earth. So, all right, maybe we'll take a couple of things, but so there's a couple of nice, juicy things to get into, including social media amplification or de-amplification in relation to Palestine. Maybe get 1 or 2 other people in as well so that the panel can take on a few questions at a time.
I have a question, sorry. Hi. Just a quick question about, in terms of legally speaking, as you mentioned, they should be part of punishing the Israel of the crimes that they're doing at the moment. So my question would be, is there also a legal issue in terms of the individuals who enabled for this? So if they stop the airplanes going through Shannon, in an ideal world, is there something that can go through the individuals who enabled that to happen until this moment, or until we actually? So that would be from a legal perspective. I would like to know that if you have an idea.
That's interesting. Great. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. That was a great presentation. I'm a big, long-standing fan of UpLift's work, and I'm very happy to hear you guys from the ditch as well. My question is kind of the inversion of that. So as opposed to the accountability, it's more like the technicality of who is the plaintiff in the case. We don't have really in this jurisdiction class actions. I'm wondering, and I've been grappling with, I suppose, the wondering of how to get beyond the locus standi, who's actually being affected in the civil case. And as Roman mentioned, there's also the criminal liability, right? So you've got like both civil and criminal liability. I'm just wondering about the technicality of that.
Yeah, maybe we might start with that one and then roll back through the other ones, because I know Roman was talking about this before we started. We were having a chat over here on the side about this question, particularly this question of standing. Who gets to say, actually, this affects me enough that I can be a plaintiff in a case of this nature. So.
Yeah, so I mean, it actually is something that we are looking at the moment. Who is the best plaintiff to take the case? Ditch Media Limited would like to take the case, but I mean, there is quite a bit of case law on standing. Some of it maybe not as nailed on as you would like it to be. I think a lot of the case law in the past has concerned, I suppose, like associations, loose associations of activists, mainly to do with like environmental cases. So yeah, I think it's something that could potentially be an issue, and it might kind of cause us to maybe take a different approach in terms of like who the plaintiff is. So yeah, it is something that we're looking at. Like in terms of criminal liability, I mean, I would say that the legislation at the moment that governs the criminal liability in terms of transporting munitions is relatively straightforward. The offence under I think it's the 1946 Air Navigation and Transport Act, it makes it an offence to contravene any order that's made under the Act. And of course we have the 1973 Munitions of War Order. So there isn't a requirement for the prosecution to prove any intent or recklessness. It's similar to when you're caught with driving with no insurance. There isn't really a defence. Right. Do you have insurance or do you not have insurance? It's not like when you're charged with murdering someone, that there has to be an element of intent to cause serious harm. It's that's why I don't really understand why at a minimum that the guards haven't started an investigation into this, because I do think on an initial reading of it, and I'm not an expert in criminal law, but like looking at the legislation, I do think it would be relatively, compared to other prosecutions, straightforward way to kind of go after the airlines. But I guess the will isn't there. And then yeah, just on the international law, again, it wouldn't be like an area that I'd have a huge amount of knowledge in. My general area would be administrative law, but yes, like Ireland has adopted the Genocide Convention. We've adopted it into our domestic law, and we've an obligation to avoid complicity. And yeah, I do wonder, like, are there people now not really giving much thought to what they're doing and their complicity in what's going on over there, that are going to have to answer questions on that, and maybe potentially prosecution in years to come, remains to be seen.
Just say quickly that of course there is a tradition in terms of war resistance where you're not the plaintiff but you're the defendant, and you get yourself in court, and for a time the Pit Stop Plowshares, the Shannon 5 case, their website was War on Trial, genocide.com, even though they were the ones who were being prosecuted for their attack on the U.S. Navy plane at Shannon in 2003. I think their lawyers made them change it to peaceontrial.com. But it is interesting. There is that kind of that version of lawfare in which you kind of go in, as a resistor in effect rather than as a plaintiff. But in any case, maybe the question of standing, and maybe you guys will also talk about the campaign and social media question too.
Yeah, just to answer the petition question. What a lot of people get wrong about petitions is that the purpose of a petition isn't to just get a load of signatures and hope that you'll shame somebody into doing something. That works on like local levels with local councillors. It works if you're like trying to keep a school open or you're trying to put pressure on the principal. If they see a load of signatures on an online petition, they might crack and they'll agree with you. But when it comes to like high level ministers and politicians, we talk about what we call like a threshold of tolerance. Somebody who's made it all the way to government minister has a very high threshold or very high tolerance level for public pressure. They're not going to just cave when they see a load of signatures. The purpose of a petition, and this is what UpLift really use it for, is to gather all the people who are interested in this issue. So getting someone to sign a petition is a really easy thing. It takes them 2 seconds, they can do that. That person is now interested, we have their email address, and then we can build our campaign around people like these. We have all these people who care and are willing to take action. And then when we come to them, like when we were doing our arms report, like UpLift is a 5 years and 10 years movement. We don't take funding from the government, obviously. We don't take funding from big corporations or anything like that. It's all just individual people. So when we say, hey, we want to go off and research Ireland's military trade with Israel, we have this petition with 50,000 signatures. 500 people from that petition might say, yeah, do you know what, here's a tenner, here's €200, here's whatever it is. And then again, from that then, if you want to do other actions, if you want to have a demo or a protest, you have this whole list of people who care about this issue. And that's the purpose of a petition. It's not the end goal, it's the first step, it's the foot in the door to gather your campaign and to grow your campaign.
Mention that one, and another meta site, and possibly another one soon. But we can see from that the difference in our analytics, the difference in our reach of our videos. There are sometimes, like in general, if we're posting a video up on TikTok and we post it over on Instagram, you will see it'll have in and around the same views, it could have in and around the same watch times, a few I suppose a few of the analytics that stick out to us are the likes of your full watch percentage. So if you have a video that's a minute and a half or so and you have anywhere from 10 to 20% of the people watching that to the very end, that video is more than likely going to go viral. It means it's going to get in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of views. And obviously that's what we want. What we are seeing though, and what I've experienced plenty of times, I've posted the same video on both platforms. Instagram this week decides it's letting this stuff out, gets its 100,000, gets its couple of 10,000 views, blah, blah, blah. And then on TikTok, you'll see it jump up very quickly and then just stop. So you could see it getting 500 views, it has that great retention value, it has those great analytics, and then it's just cut and it's gone. There are sometimes you'll get a flag and it'll say to you this video is unavailable to certain people, to certain audiences. You can appeal that. Even with those appeals, they can take up to a day or two, and if you win them, your video doesn't really do much after that. Can't obviously say because we don't know fully what's going on in the background, but for me it does indicate that there is some kind of suppression that's going on there. It gets very bad at times. TikTok especially had for about 6 or 7 months there, had basically altered in a way somehow the community guidelines that if you use the word genocide, if you use the word Israel, your video was put down. And I can say I have experience of that, I've seen it. And again, we've seen the videos that done well over on Instagram, they didn't do well in the same. And it happens, it flip-flops and it flip-flops. And when your algorithm changes, that's probably where they're going to say, yeah, this week we're not, or this. Now, you don't know what's behind it, the suspicions as to what could be behind the reasons for it, but it is definitely something that we're seeing. And I suppose the only real way to combat that is to just keep the posting, keep the sharing, and just do our best to get it outside of the smaller echo chamber, because obviously with the lesser views it's just people who are already on board, who are already signing petitions, taking actions. So yeah, it's trying to get that shared out really is where the difficulty comes in, but there is definitely something there. Yeah, hopefully that wasn't.
That's interesting. My daughter won't let me go on TikTok, but I know that. But in the early days of the genocide, of course, TikTok was seen as the place where people were hearing the most about it. But then it was also very quickly being identified as this viral vector of anti-Semitism, that therefore, and of course coming under potential regulatory and pressure in the United States that would have been a big motivation
so there
to
is a
tweak
lot
the
going
algorithm.
on there in the background.
Oh, maybe you talk about the social media thing too, because it's obviously very important to the way that you disseminate.
Yeah, and would agree a lot with that. Where we mainly rely on Twitter. We've also we've been growing our Instagram for the last while. Look, like, what can you say about Elon Musk and his you got like Knox's politics, all the rest, etc., etc. For me, the problem isn't his politics; it's more the fact that anyone can buy a piece of infrastructure like Twitter and then start messing around with it, basically, you know. And don't get me wrong, like, you know, Jack Dorsey's Twitter was you know, far from perfect as well. You know, it wasn't great. It wasn't a great place to be on the left either. What we found, broadly speaking, is I think Twitter is less and less a place for people to get news from, and you can see that, you know, even small things like the way that they've changed the way your links will show up, that it's just a picture now, right? We've also seen, you know, things like, so like if we get a certain number of retweets, back in the day you could expect a certain number of impressions. That, generally speaking, it's down across the board, but then every now and again you'll have, like, say for example, something like the story about Pascal Donohue's phone call. It was probably our most read story in quite some time, you know. So sometimes, you know, as you're saying, it is just a thing of keeping on going, basically, and keeping on, you know, because, and yeah, like, and again, to agree as well, I'm always be very skeptical of anyone who tell you that they know how the algorithm works or whatever, and also be very skeptical of, you can see on any social network, we've never been fans of, you know, trying to game the system, basically, and you can see other influencers or other news accounts, you can see, you know, people will decide, oh, this is what we do now, right? You know, like, we'll focus on video, or we'll focus on long tweets and we'll have the link in the next tweet, etc., etc. All that kind of guesswork, I don't think it's worth the hassle, basically, and I think you're better off just kind of trusting your own processes and, you know, hoping that you get a good day at the algorithm next day, you know, basically, is the kind of short version of it all.
But you don't have a kind of aha, you know, Pascal Donohue goes viral, but a Palestine tweet doesn't, as a general rule that you can...
No, yeah, I mean, like, we've had... it's been at different stages over the course of the 3 or 4 years, like, where at times, like, we've been like, Jesus, you know, we're being hit and we're being hit and we're being hit, and then suddenly, all right, we're not being hit anymore. It hasn't, for me anyway, it hasn't been noticeable as far as Palestine goes. I do have a general feeling that left-wing news publishers have been generally suppressed a little bit in the Musk era, but again, that's just a feeling, and not specific to Palestine. I think just anything vaguely left.
Fair enough, yeah.
They
weren't doing too well in the previous era, as you said as well. Sorry, yes,
so one of UpLift's sister organisations, hamle.org, they operate the Palestinian digital rights organisation based out of Haifa. So they do an awful lot of work. Their website has tons and tons of research on social media suppression, particularly looking at Google, Facebook and Twitter. So I would urge anybody to check out hamle.org. It's spelled, the ha is the Palestinian, it's a number 7, AMLEH.org.
That is, they do great work. That is worth looking at. Elon Musk hasn't unshadow banned me, unfortunately. I went down under the Dorsey regime and I've never come back. So we've got Jim, and then at the back there. Okay, so we'll start with you, Jim.
Yeah, first of all, thank both groups of UpLift and Ditch for the wonderful work they've done. Keep it up, and it's really putting pressure on the government, and a great embarrassment to the government. So and a great inspiration, I think, to the broader movement here in Ireland. So thank you very much. I want to ask a question, get back to America, and the difference between, hopefully, the ordinary American people and the establishment elites, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. And I want to refer to polls that were carried out over several months back, as far back as March, that I've read about. People like Nora Arakat refers to them, that the American people were ahead of the government in terms of their concern for Palestine, and the fact that even there was one result, and this was these are established polling groups like Gallup and stuff, whereby even the Republicans who were canvassed, 40% of them felt Israel was going too far and it should stop and it should be ceasefire and all that. And I think there was one that said we shouldn't be sending arms there. So I'd just like to get your opinion. What's your feeling about that? Because I just finished with this, that people don't vote on foreign policy issues generally. I suspect the same in America as it is here. I mean, it's so hard here to get neutrality or foreign policy on the agenda. It's a bit easier to get Palestine on now because of what's happening, but I suspect it didn't feature in the American election. I don't know, I might be wrong, but maybe only at the time of the Vietnam War when US kids were getting killed, that foreign policy feature. So what's your opinion about that, and how, even with the Trump presidency, which none of us are looking forward to, with all the appointments, how it might that mood might change, given those polls that have showed that the ordinary people generally feel sympathy for Palestine.
Okay, let's hold that. We'll hold that one. So the American electorate as ahead of its political class, yeah.
Hey, that's Jack. I'm from the Dublin IPS branch, and I'm a shop steward across the way in Trinity College, Dublin. I just want to, first question, probably for the ditch. You should probably remember you put out a story about Trinity's ties to blacklisted companies. That really got things going, because the college up until that point had denied that they had links, and that kind of really put them on the spot. And obviously since then, staff have been really pushing towards, with students obviously, ties being cut to companies, institutions and suppliers, and we're seeing good success on that, albeit that very, very slow and through a process that's taken very long. I just want to say from that perspective of freedom of information requests and the work that you do to put that information into the hands of the public and the hands of the workers across the road, I think that is there anything or any advice that you give to people, to be able to use that, and then just in terms of, would you have any advice, or would you have something put together in terms of freedom of information requests people would be able to use? And then the second question for the panel, I suppose, I was delighted to see that this was happening, not only one case, but yourselves as well, two cases. I saw that a group had taken the Dutch government, and they're going through that process of suing the Dutch state as well over that. What's the current status on your cases, I suppose, and what can we do to help and support both cases and to bring it back more into the public eye and back you? Is there anything that you need? So,
great. That's a great question. Thanks. So about the complicity and what we can do to support both these cases and others. Yeah, Con, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, somebody mentioned about the Americans. Let's not undermine the political system. The political structure on the ground has moved. People have moved. Who would have thought the numbers of people from around Europe and the world would have become engaged on the issue of Palestine 7 or 10 years ago? Who would have thought that? So let's build on that. And let's encourage people to keep on talking about justice and peace in Palestine, and holding those responsible, those who are complicit, from the European Commission to the terror of all terror states in Washington and in Capitol Hill to point. But let us embrace those people, the activists in Jewish Voice for Action Peace, the grannies, the elderly women who chained themselves to the Oval Office, and to young families who refuse to listen to the garbage, to the bullshit that was coming out of BBC One. And let's hold that yoke. Us genocide. Us are one to her point. She is complicit in the murder of women and children.
Okay.
And uphold that poet, James Baldwin. Every village that's been bombed is my hometown. So let's move forward and let's keep the pressure on the bastards from the actual Tories to their new Labour, and to stand in solidarity with activists in Germany who've been threatened, bullied and abused, who have refused to bow to the Zionist Israeli American agenda. So fuck them. Keep going.
More a comment than a question from Con, but absolutely excellent. And I'll kind of follow it anyway, though, a little bit, because there was elements of what he said and what Jim was asking there about America that I feel like I can and should maybe just come in on a little bit, because my own nieces and nephews are Jewish anti-war activists in America. My nephew Joey was arrested at his college last year, and I know that when it came to the election, my sister had to twist her son's arms to vote at all, and they voted for Jill Stein in New York. They voted for the Green candidate, Jill Stein, but they had to write her in because the Democrats had worked so hard to make sure that she couldn't get onto the ballot in New York. You know, so that's the American political system, and I'm fairly convinced that Palestine cost the Democrats significant votes in this election, and maybe even cost the election. The youth abstention, the votes in college towns, etc. I mean, there is, if you just look at the youth vote on its own, it moves towards Trump pretty dramatically. But if you look at the total numbers of the youth vote, they're down. Now, obviously, that's partly demographic bulges that change over a period. But it seems to me, and looking at my nephews are very politically minded fellas, and the fact that my sister had to kick them to the voting booth was, I think, indicative of a kind of an angry indifference by which they addressed the election. And obviously, I think we've all heard about what happened in Dearborn, my own hometown, Paterson in New Jersey, which is a very Palestinian town, where again there was a lot of that same kind of resistance. And the Democrats taking it for granted that these were just more brown people whose votes they were entitled to, no matter what they were doing to their loved ones and families in the Middle East. So I do think that I agree with you, Jim. I think the American people in general are ahead on this, and that includes a lot of Republican voters who you can see all over X, Twitter, complaining that Trump is appointing too many hawks to his cabinet. There were a significant number of Republican voters who thought that voting for Trump, misguided and all as they may have been, they thought they were voting for someone who was likelier to bring foreign wars to a stop, including the appalling one that we're talking about here tonight. So, does anybody want to come in on the American question and also I don't want to lose sight of the Trinity question, which is specifically addressed to you guys in the ditch. Any responses on that, and indeed on the complicity and solidarity point?
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody here is under no illusions. I think you summed it up quite well. Young people in America are not politically apathetic. I think they're probably more politically engaged now than they have been for decades. And the low turnouts reflect that they're not happy with their choices. For America to say it's the world's greatest democracy or whatever, and the choice is A or B, is not really flowing with the public anymore. And yeah, like you said, they're not representative of the people. I think if you look at polls, like you said, Gallup polls, the Rand Corporation did a study a few years back showing the level of how much people believed that their political representatives actually represented them. and you can see, particularly as income levels drop, that there is no correlation between the two lines. People in the US, there's a dire lack of democracy and representation, and that's what's playing out. And I think it's it is really, like people talk about the fall of the US empire. We really are seeing cracks in the structure, and who knows where that leads to exactly. But it definitely is starting to play out here, and I think this election will be looked back on by historians as a key turning point in that decline.
Ross, do you want to?
Yeah, I think just like on an online sense, in terms of seeing like what's coming out of America, especially around their elections, there was definitely what you're saying there and what Browne kind of said as well, just in terms of the A or B choice. Like you said, you had to your family had to write in Jill Stein, and there did seem to be quite a lot of people online who would have voted for her, but just they don't really have the options, and many people, from what I saw, obviously, kind of turned and voted Democrat or voted for Trump, and as you said, both sides felt like they were probably the better option for ending the genocide. However, at the same time, we know that's not true. We know that the Democrats are going to continue on as they kind of have been. We've seen over the last while, the United States had said to Israel to allow more aid into Gaza, to get a humanitarian stop and all this kind of stuff. They gave them 30 days. The 30 days was up. I think Israel let in something like 10 trucks into the north of Gaza and then essentially bombed them. And the US just kind of stood back and said, yeah, and I don't think that's going to change. I do fear it's going to get worse under Trump, but there was also the narrative that Trump was the one, it was peaceful during his term, which I think may have turned some pro-Palestinians towards Trump, which is a concern because he's coming out now, as you're saying, and it doesn't seem to be the case. So.
Yeah, and I think the idea that Americans, don't vote on foreign wars or on foreign policy, and obviously Vietnam was mentioned as an exception. It's worth saying, Richard Nixon was elected as the peace candidate in 1968. That was he was going to bring peace with honor, and Humphrey was like Harris, saddled with the war policy of the president. He was the vice president at the time. He had to run on his administration's war policy, and Nixon was elected in 1968. I think Barack Obama was elected very much, not only, it was also obviously the financial crisis in 2008, but he had made his reputation as one of the relatively small number of Democratic opponents of the Iraq War. Maybe not to the extent that we would have wished, but certainly I think in the context of American politics that was true. And arguably Trump as well was running in 2016 against the stupid Iraq War and the neocon tradition of the leadership of the Republican Party over the previous 2 decades. So I think that, like, to a certain extent, there's been a case that something close to a third or a half of recent American elections, that candidates have emerged partly on the basis of successful candidates have emerged partly on the basis of their apparent principled opposition to some foreign wars. Do you guys want to come in on the American thing, or indeed on the question about the solidarity and action in relation to places like Trinity?
Yeah, I mean, like on the American side of things, I mean, one thing I found interesting has been these kind of cleavages that have emerged in their tech industry, which so on a managerial, executive, shareholder level, yes, still very pro-Israel, but you would have seen different level of trade unionist action in some of the big tech companies across the US, and it's how does that play out in the future? Like how can companies like Google or AWS maintain these really, really significant military contracts while they have, because say like if it was 10, 20, 30 years ago, the people who work in these tech companies, they would have gone to an elite university and they would have come out and you probably would have called them something like a liberal Zionist, I guess, and that kind of tradition is it's dying a little bit, and as you referred to, the protests at US colleges and in Ireland as well is emblematic of that, and US support for Israel is always, it's required that liberal Zionist tradition. So where are these liberal Zionists coming from now, right? Now, if you want to be pessimistic about it, then you could then also just say that, like, look, the US will continue its support regardless of any of these cleavages and kind of conflicts that are emerging, as long as they want an aircraft carrier in the Middle East that will antagonize its neighbors and preclude any kind of opportunity for, pan-Arab solidarity, I guess, But then that then comes back to the broader question then of, well, what does that say about the global swing of power? I'm in two minds about it. Different people predict different levels of multipolarity on the way we could be looking at something along those lines. And yeah, certainly it's just been just on a very, very simple level. It was great to see that level of activism in Trinity, and I know that ongoing, I think as well. I read a report about people who were involved in the encampment. They aren't happy about their level of involvement in the ongoing task force.
Yeah,
But so that kind of struggle continues. But it's been great to see. Yeah.
And Roman, did you want to come in on any of those things? I'm quite interested in this point that Eoghan raises about the tech industry, but maybe it's a different meeting. Because I know you guys have a certain insight and some background and connections there as well in the ditch and in the history of the ditch. So, but you can address that, or if you want to address any of the other points.
Yeah, I don't think I can add much to the conversation in the American stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Nothing more than has already been said. But yeah, just on the freedom of information stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it is a very powerful tool. I mean, if you look at people like Ken Fox, they've had great success, like with, there aren't many people like that who are kind of like, that will kind of like put that level of effort in, because like it's very frustrating and it's very tempting when you get a FOI refusal to just kind of give up.
Yeah.
It's extremely time consuming, but it can bear fruit. But I think like as we saw like with the Trinity stuff, sometimes you can get what you're looking for. I think sometimes people maybe you call them citizen journalists or whatever would not the far right type that you see on Twitter, but that put in freedom of information requests themselves, and often come to us with they realise that they need a platform, or maybe mainstream outlet is not interested in what they've found, but yeah, they can come to us, and I think more people should do that, because, as I said, it is extremely time consuming. Like, we've a very small team of just 3 people. We do put in FOI requests, but invariably the stuff that you want is refused. So you have to put in a request for review. You're usually not successful in that. It's just a rubber stamping exercise. Then you have to go to the information commissioner. I mean, the level of work involved in all of that can't be underestimated. So I do think it's great when people take their own initiative and who feel passionate about particular things and just fire in requests and keep going with it.
Yeah, very much so, because there is a vicious cycle in the media whereby the government departments know that they can stall like hell on FOI requests, and media companies know that they can't give long-term commitments to people investigating stories. We can't wait. You've got to be producing. You can't have stories that take a long time to publish. And so Ken is fantastic because, and I definitely recommend, if you're not familiar with Ken's work, like go find it, a great guide to using FOI, but also like the kind of great kind of running storylines about the various requests that he puts in, because the refusals and all that are part of the way that he tells the story of how FOI works in Ireland, and a great resource in that regard, but a fairly unique one, you know, that the system is fairly broken in relation to that, because they really know. I mean, if you guys used it in...
yeah, I think we've used it in UpLift. I've used it personally then on a few different campaigns I've done, and like when you are, as an individual, trying to get a freedom of information request, it can be, like you said, the stalling tactics. So I think they have 30 days to respond to you. You are never getting a response in that 30 days. You then have to ask them for an internal review, which is another 14 days. And then, as the lads are saying there, if that's refused, or if they just don't respond to you, it's deemed refused. And I think is it a €50 charge to put in a complaint to the OIC?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, so you then have to pay to actually bring that to the authority for them to investigate it, to come back. So there's so many roadblocks that it does just make it difficult. Yeah.
Just to give like a good example actually of how the state uses the freedom of information, or in this particular case, the access to information on the environment, which is European legislation.
Kind of you can run it almost as a pseudo FOI.
Or parallel. Yeah. I mean, so we put in an AIE request to the authorities in Belgium for information relating to other flights that happened at a later period and that we didn't have, and we had to put the request in Dutch. We managed to do it without a translator. We put it in, and in 30 days we got a massive amount of documents, like hundreds of documents, exactly what we wanted. At the same, during the same period or the same week, I put in a request to the Department of Transport in Ireland, and I asked them for, it was a very straightforward request, a very short period of time. I deliberately kind of nailed down exactly what we were asking for, because I know that they refuse it if they say, you know, it's too much of an administrative burden or whatever, it's too vague. So they came back with kind of a stupid clarification, like they were just taking the piece basically. And I wrote back to them, and as I said, like very straightforward. Like, I mean, it wouldn't have taken more than maybe an hour, 30 minutes at a push to kind of search and put all this stuff together. And they wrote back to me after 4 weeks, and they said, because of the nature of your request and the amount of how complex it is, we're extending it to another month. And so they extended it, and then at the end of that month, they basically gave us nothing. It was 2 sheets of paper, and we're not giving you this stuff, we've redacted it all. So like a complete piss take, like there was no kind of good faith or anything on their part. It was literally just, we're going to play games with you, we're going to delay it, we're going to protect the minister, protect the department, you know, delay it as long as possible, and then at the very last day, we're not giving you anything. You know, and it's just completely disingenuous, but that's what you're up against. You know?
I think that corresponds with an awful lot of experience, including the part about the AEI abroad being pretty effective, actually, though. That you can, the access to environmental information requests actually seem to work pretty well all over Europe. But the FOIs here, forget about it. I know so many people that the story ends up being, can you believe how much they took the piss out of me? For the 3 months I was trying to track down this story, and then they gave me this redacted document that I can't do anything with. You know. Anyway, so maybe we'll take one more round of questions, and we'll call it finished.
My question is largely for the ditch, but also commend UpLift's work on the dual use. My question is about the Irish Defence and Security Association, which you recently commented on, which is great. I'm just wondering, did they come back to you? Is there any follow-up on that? But just to let people know that we are now inviting large arms companies into this country, including Lockheed Martin, the biggest in the world. And the members of this Irish Defence and Security Association include Lockheed Martin and Saab and other large arms companies. And we've been following this for a couple of years now, so this has been going on for a while. But the website says our members include some of the most reputable companies in the defence and security industry. Now, reputable means you know what.
That's like I'm highly reputable, right?
Yeah. So, Lockheed are reputable. Yeah, sure, of course. Well, really, my question is, you know, is there anywhere we can go with this to follow this up or do more? I'm involved with an Irish organisation called STOP, which is exploring, looking at the arms trade and active against it. But I mean, have you any ideas around that?
Very good. Okay, any one or two more so that we can kind of bring things back to the table?
If anyone is interested, that's what we're trying to do as well with this particular election campaign. And as I said, they're online, you can see who signed them and who didn't, and the individual candidates as well. So, no, just sorry, what about this?
No, that's great, Martin. Thank you. Much appreciated. And look, the IPSC is magnificent. You know, God bless them. Just an incredible organization, and have been for 25 and more years, of course. But particularly this last 15 months, it's been extraordinary. And there've been other organizations, of course, doing immense work in that period too. But I think it's definitely an opportunity for us to say thank you, IPSC. Thank you. So the two questions, I think, are like kind of like the military industry as Irish industrial policy, in effect, and then the question of the election, and maybe also the after election too. You know, what happens in the formation of government, and where can we put Palestine in that moment. You know, but obviously, what do we need from the election in order to get us to a place where Palestine can have an effective spot in that negotiation? So maybe we'll come across the panel starting on this side. I'll let you finish on that industrial thing.
Just remind me of the question, sir. Just remind me of that again, sir.
Yeah, so it was kind of the military contractors as industrial policy, the security and defence.
Yeah, I don't think I'd have much knowledge of it, so I don't.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. Do you want to talk about the politics then, the election? We have talked about it a bit already.
Yeah.
But what can we do, and what are the prospects?
I suppose the guide obviously that we were saying, as well as the kind of notes coming out from the IPSC, are also very good to ask. But I suppose in terms of as we're looking at like a left government, I suppose is kind of what we were coming out there. It's not just like, obviously Palestine is a massive issue, and the lack of action by the Irish government has been a massive issue, and it will be going forward. But there's also other, I suppose, progressive policies that have been put by the wayside. We're looking at housing, especially with UpLift. As I said earlier on, we do quite a lot of work when it comes to, like, you know, the Empty Homes campaign. That is something that I suppose ties back in, whether it is arms, whether it is investments, when it's big companies, whether it's energy, it all ties back to big money. It all ties back to vulture funds, as they're called, investment funds and things like that. And really and truly, we do need that push, but it's how we get that out there, and it's how we talk to one another about it. I'd be a big advocate for the conversation and the kitchen table politics. It's when, you know, we obviously sit in this room here together. I'd say we're all fairly like-minded people. We're probably all going to be voting somewhere in the same lines, but it's how do we get that out there? So I believe personally that there is a want for a better world and a better Ireland that does take action, that does stand up. And it's highlighting it to our friends, it's highlighting it to our families, it's highlighting it to those that we work with, that will see that change, hopefully, and that move away from doing everything for the investors, for the profit, for the constant growth that is capitalism when it comes to that, and to start to pull back more into something for the people, making sure we have a home, no matter who you are, where you're from. And it ends up all kind of tying in one and the same, in my opinion. So yeah.
Thanks, Ross. I suppose just add to that, UpLift obviously non-partisan organisation. We don't support or endorse any particular party. So we do have a guide out just kind of with some key questions to ask people knock at your door in the next couple of weeks. When it comes to, if you're talking about a left government and how that would be formed, when it comes to Sinn Féin in particular as an element of that, personally I think Sinn Féin have a lot of things to answer over the last 12 months in their response to what's been happening in Gaza. We've seen that they, at the very first motion that was put in the Dáil in October 2023, they failed to endorse a call for the Israeli ambassador to be ousted. I know they later brought their own motion a month later. But that initial kind of knee-jerk response of testing the waters with their voter base leaves a lot to be desired. And again, I think it ties back to what we said earlier. Sinn Féin could see at that time that they were polling very high. There was a real chance that they would be the next government, and they don't want to go out and sever ties with the US at their first chance in office, which again, it's that complicated question of how does someone balance that. Also, you would have to look to the north where Sinn Féin are currently in power, and Conor Murphy, who is the economy minister over InvestNI. InvestNI have financially been supporting arms dealers in the UK who are manufacturing components for F-35 jets. We are calling on Sinn Féin and Conor Murphy in particular to sever those ties and to sever that investment. In fairness, while he's been in that position, there hasn't been any funding given, but we haven't heard any talk of that funding being severed either. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out as well. I think you can look at the north as a good testing ground for how it might look, how it might play out south of the border as well.
Thanks, Browne.
Yeah, I think I'd like to, I'm sure Eoghan as well would like to answer the IDSA question, the Irish Defence and Security Association. I think like it's an incredible example of how people with a very clear agenda can just, you know, set up an organisation, get an incredible amount of media exposure, and I think it's always the case like that if you're an academic in that area of, you know, international security, that it's very easy to get media coverage without people actually looking behind that person and, you know, what are they involved with and what are they pushing here. I mean, people talk about the Ditch being a political organisation or campaign journalism, like talk about campaign academics. Do you know what I mean? Like these people are pushing Ireland, you know, under the guise of international security and, you know, Reds under the bed and all this sort of stuff, are pushing, you know, the government to invest billions in arms and weaponry and military equipment, and they just so happen to be involved with these associations that represent these armed dealers, and nobody's asking the question, what's going on here? Do you know what I mean? It's just they're sensible academics, we need to listen to them, you know, they have genuine concerns, but nobody has really questioned any of that. In fact, some of these people can write articles for newspapers and you won't even see it mentioned that they're involved with these associations.
Yeah.
You know?
No, whenever you see an academic or a think tank with security in the title, you know this is an absolute ghoul.
And I think actually, just to say the final point I'd make is that some of these people are very dangerous, and the stuff, the way that they're putting it out and the underhandedness, you know, I think that they can be quite dangerous in what they're trying to do, and you know, I think more people need to call them out, or at least point out the fact that this is actually really what they're trying to do. You know?
Instead, we gave them a trade fair in the form of the Consultative Forum on neutrality last summer. You know.
Yeah. And yeah, like similar actually, Alec Harry wrote a great piece about that for the Ditch in print last year, and similar to some of the stuff that you talked about in that piece. You know, these people, you know, they float in and around this kind of think tank industrial complex itself, almost in a way. In the case of IDS in particular, like we're talking, the guy called Ben Tondra, he's an academic at UCD. You can kind of say whatever you want about him. Look, he's one of these guys who's a commentator on Irish security and neutrality, and he just wants to have a conversation, right? But he doesn't want to have. But yeah, to answer your question, no, neither he nor the organisation engage with us at all when we've written those stories about him. Equally, when we have done a couple of freedom of information requests on some lobbying activity that they were involved in. We get a little bit back, I mean, and this is what they are. It's a lobbying organisation, not unlike what the Collisons have up their sleeves with these guys, Progress Ireland. But it just so happens that these guys, I think that in the case of IDSA, and you have this guy like Ben Donner who just wants to have a conversation, right? And it's a group that does lobbying for these arms manufacturers. Obviously, a lot of these people were radicalized during the Ukrainian war. I mean, which it didn't help matters that we were going through COVID as well, like where a lot of people just, really dived into that, like, and what you have now is, I do think that it's a good example of, it's kind of it's one of the first examples of this kind of that kind of organization spreading into Ireland. You'll get them a lot. They're a lot more widespread in Britain and the US and across Europe. To answer your question in a very, very simple way, I mean, I personally do think these people should be, if not ridiculed, certainly questioned and have these, as Roman would say, these blatant biases. Or not even biases, but things that they don't want to talk about or refuse to acknowledge. Because, the one thing I would say, since we've been doing these stories about flights through Irish territory, there have been a handful of guys, right? Guys who don't necessarily like us, who are security reporters. And it's been interesting to see a handful of them. There's a guy called Don Lavery who's had a go at us quite a few times before. He's actually been quite invested in our flight stories, right? And it's interesting, and it's always when I see something like that, I'm kind of fair play, you have a principled interest in this kind of thing. There are lots of other guys who are if there's a Russian warship, halfway across wherever the fuck, they'll have it on the front page of their newspaper, and it'll be the only thing that they talk about. Whereas, people like Ben Tonra and that kind of class people that they represent, I mean, to be blunt about it, it's a lot of people think that there's a lot of money to be made that Irish capital could be making that it's not at the moment, and this is why you have, as you refer to in your piece, this consultative forum. That was one strand of it, and IDSA is another great example.
Yeah, great. I mean, I know that the Ditch has done incredible work in this. I think that Brian mentioned earlier the currency. Niall Sargent in the currency, and I know the IPSC asked me to give a shout out to the currency for the very good work they've done on the dual-use weapons story in particular. So that's duly done. I also just wanted to mention one thing that I came across today that I think will be of interest in terms of this kind of media conversation, because of the reaction that we've seen in the last 24 hours to Mary Lou McDonald's suggestion that RTE's coverage of Gaza maybe should be subjected to some independent scrutiny about its objectivity. And Mark Cullinan, who's a great scholar of the history of RTE, points out that in 2012, the Irish Independent reported that the Oireachtas Committee on Communications, which had been looking into scandal in RTE around the Father Reynolds story at that time, the committee said that it had written to the communications minister recommending that there should be regular audits of RTE's top current affairs programs to monitor them for signs of bias. So the Oireachtas Committee, which at the time had 8 members out of 15 who were Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, was prepared to suggest to the Minister of Communications that RTE should undergo regular audits for signs of bias. Now that Mary Lou McDonald is suggesting something similar, we're losing our minds, and this is a plan for a Stalinism in Ireland. So, maybe on that note, a big thanks to Ross and Brian.